My name is Elena Vera. I'm 32 years old. There are moments that etch themselves into your memory with such precision you could sketch them decades later. For me, it was a lunch that should have been ordinary. Just me and my boyfriend, Daniel, sitting across from each other at a downtown bistro, with sun pouring through wide glass windows. Daniel had been exhausted lately. Weeks of late nights at the office, drowning under deadlines, always pushing to please a boss who demanded too much. He brushed it off, telling me that's just how corporate life is, but I could feel something heavier in him, something unspoken gnawing at his confidence. That was why I had insisted on this lunch. A pause, a reminder that outside of office politics, someone loved him unconditionally. When he walked in and smiled at me, I saw it. The tiredness behind his eyes, the way his tie was slightly askew as though even fabric was rebelling against the hours he kept. I teased him about it. He laughed, though the sound was thin, and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. For 20 minutes, it felt normal again, safe. We joked about the awful art on the walls, complained about the overpriced coffee, and allowed ourselves to breathe. Then he arrived. Bastion Drew, Daniel's boss. If arrogance could take human form, it would look like him. Slick hair, immaculate suit, watch worth more than my apartment, and that grin. That awful grin that wasn't a smile at all, but a declaration. I own this room, and if I want something in it, I'll take it. At first, he didn't even notice me. His eyes went straight to Daniel like a hawk sighting prey. The air around us shifted, brittle and sharp. Daniel's fork trembled slightly in his hand. I leaned closer and whispered, "What's wrong?" He shook his head quickly. "Nothing, just eat." But his eyes told me everything. I turned just as Bastion approached our table, not with hesitation, not even with courtesy. He pulled out the empty chair across from me, as though he'd been invited. "Elena," Daniel muttered, his voice tight, "this is my boss." Bastion smirked at me briefly, then leaned forward, his attention returning to Daniel. "Didn't realize this was a family outing," he said smoothly. His tone dripped mockery, like my presence was nothing more than a placeholder, a distraction in the way of his entertainment. Daniel tried to interject. "Bastion, we're in the middle of—" Before he could finish, Bastion's hand landed on his shoulder, firm, claiming, and then, like a predator, testing boundaries. It slid lower, fingers pressing in ways that were neither professional nor respectful. My pulse kicked hard. "Excuse me," I said sharply. "You're crossing a line." He didn't even look at me. His eyes stayed locked on Daniel, lips curling into that cruel smile. "Leave," he said lazily, as if the outcome had already been decided. "He's mine now. Or face me, woman to man." For a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to fall silent. Silverware froze, conversations halted. Only Daniel's sharp inhale broke the stillness. He pushed Bastion's hand away, but Bastion only laughed, a low sound that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the touch. It was the way he looked at Daniel as though he was property, as though I was irrelevant, as though my boyfriend's dignity was his to shred. And something inside me snapped. I stood slowly, the legs of my chair scraping against tile. Daniel's eyes widened, fear flickering in them. Not fear of Bastion, but fear of me. Fear of what I might do. Because in that instant, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a line blurred by workplace tension. This was a predator staking his claim. A man so drunk on his own power he believed humiliation was his right. I couldn't let that stand. "Elena," Daniel whispered urgently, tugging at my sleeve, "please don't." I didn't answer him. I kept my gaze on Bastion, who now leaned back in his chair like a king, watching entertainment unfold. "You really want to do this here?" he asked, his tone mocking, his smirk daring. "Yes," I said evenly. My voice surprised even me. It was steady, sharp, like steel drawn from its sheath. Bastion chuckled, rising slowly from the table. His movements were theatrical, designed for the audience he knew was forming. I saw phones half raised, recording already. He wanted humiliation, spectacle. He was about to get both. Daniel's grip on my arm tightened. "Elena, don't do this. He's not worth it." But I looked into Daniel's eyes and shook my head. "He thinks he can own you," I whispered. "He's about to learn he can't." We stepped outside together, the air crisp, the street alive with whispers and anticipation. People pressed against the windows of the restaurant, others spilling onto the sidewalk. Bastion loosened his tie with a flourish, rolling his shoulders like he was about to perform for an eager crowd. "Last chance," he drawled, that predatory grin back in place. "Walk away, sweetheart, or I'll take him from you right here." It was the spark that lit the powder keg. My heart hammered, not with fear, but with a ferocity I hadn't known I carried. I wasn't just protecting Daniel, I was standing against a man who had spent years convincing himself that no one could stop him. I glanced at Daniel one last time. His lips parted as though to beg again, but I shook my head gently. Trust me. And then I turned back to Bastion. Touch him again, I said, my voice low enough that only he could hear, and you'll regret it. For the first time, his grin faltered. Just slightly, enough to tell me he had no idea what was coming. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about every time Daniel had come home too tired to speak, every shadow of doubt he'd carried because of this man, every moment he'd been made to feel small. This wasn't just a lunch, it was the beginning of a reckoning. The afternoon air was sharp, the kind that nips at your skin and makes sound travel further than it should. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, their curiosity electric. Some leaned against lampposts, phones already pointed at us, eager to catch whatever spectacle was about to unfold. Bastion fed on that attention. He thrived on it. He stood there, loosening his tie, stretching his neck as though preparing for a performance, his smirk spread wide, rehearsed for maximum arrogance. He wanted this fight. He wanted the humiliation that would follow, not his, but mine. Daniel clutched at my arm, desperation in his grip. Elena, please, don't do this. He's dangerous. You don't need to prove anything. I turned to him, searching his eyes. What I saw gutted me. Fear. Not of Bastion, but of losing me to the reckless storm building inside. Daniel, I whispered, pressing my palm against his cheek. This isn't about proving anything. It's about ending something. Bastion laughed behind me, mocking. Listen to him, sweetheart. He's begging you because he knows how this ends. Men like him, they always step aside when someone stronger shows up. The words cut like glass. Not just for me, for Daniel too. I felt his shame in the way his shoulders slumped, in the way his eyes dropped. Bastion knew how to weaponize insecurity, how to strip a man of dignity without even raising a fist. That's what enraged me most. I straightened and faced Bastion. You've had your last chance. His grin widened. Perfect. Then let's make this fun. He lunged first, exactly as I expected. Fast, wide, sloppy. Arrogance made men sloppy. He swung his arm, like he thought intimidation alone would land the blow. I sidestepped, my hand snapping up to block. The shock of his momentum jolted through my arms, but I stayed steady. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He swung again, this time slower, testing me. I ducked low, pivoted, and drove my elbow into his ribs. The sound was sharp, a crack that silenced even the spectators for a heartbeat. Bastion stumbled back, his smirk faltering. His eyes flared with something new, confusion. He hadn't expected resistance, let alone retaliation. Still want to play alpha? I thought, though my lips pressed into a cold line instead of speaking it aloud. He snarled and came at me again, reckless this time. His fist cut through air where my face had been a moment earlier. I caught his arm mid-swing, twisted hard, and felt the sickening pop of his shoulder giving way. His scream tore through the street, raw and ugly. Phones lifted higher. Every second was being immortalized. Bastion staggered, clutching his arm, but his pride wouldn't let him stop. He lunged again, slower, weaker. I drove my fist into his gut, the breath exploding out of him in a pitiful wheeze. He collapsed to his knees, coughing, spittle wetting the pavement. Daniel's voice cracked through the chaos. Elena, stop, that's enough. But it wasn't enough, not yet. I grabbed Bastion by the collar, forcing his head up so his eyes met mine. Gone was the predator's grin. Gone was the confidence. What stared back at me was fear. Touch him again, I said, my voice low, deadly steady, and I will break more than bones. I shoved him down, his body sprawling against the pavement like a discarded puppet. The crowd erupted, some gasping, others cheering, all of them recording. Bastion lay there, groaning, clutching his ribs, his arrogance shattered. 10 minutes. That's all it took. 10 minutes for the man who thought he owned every room he walked into to be reduced to a broken heap at my feet. Daniel rushed to me, his hands trembling as they closed around mine. His eyes were wide, a storm of emotions swirling inside, fear, awe, relief, and something else. Guilt. Elena, he whispered, voice trembling. I should have... I pressed a finger against his lips. No, don't you dare blame yourself. This was never your shame to carry. It was his. Behind us, Bastion tried to spit out words, broken curses mixed with groans. The sound was pathetic, stripped of the power he once wielded so easily. For the first time, I saw him clearly. Not an untouchable boss, not a predator cloaked in power, but a coward. And as I stood over him, chest heaving, I understood something vital. This wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It wasn't even about me. It was about every person Bastion had ever cornered, every assistant who'd stayed quiet, every colleague who'd swallowed their discomfort to keep their job. He thought no one would ever stop him, but today he met someone who would. I turned, taking Daniel's hand firmly in mine. Together, we walked back into the restaurant, leaving Bastion writhing on the concrete, his reputation bleeding out as quickly as his pride. Inside, the silence was heavy, thick with the aftermath of violence. People averted their eyes, pretending to study menus, pretending not to whisper. Daniel's grip on me tightened, his voice low enough only I could hear. "You didn't just protect me," he murmured. "You changed everything." I exhaled slowly, letting the truth of it settle. He was right. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Bastion Drew wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. His broken bones were just the beginning. The storm was only starting. The police arrived faster than I expected. Maybe it was the noise. Maybe it was the swarm of people with phones raised like weapons, broadcasting every second to the digital void. By the time the blue lights painted the street, Bastion was curled on the pavement, clutching his arm, his once perfect suit streaked with grime, and his face twisted in rage and pain. "Step back, ma'am," one officer ordered as he moved toward me, hand hovering near his holster. I raised both palms slowly. "I defended him," I said firmly, tilting my head toward Daniel, who still clung to my arm. "Check the cameras. Ask anyone here." Voices erupted before the officers could reply. He grabbed the boyfriend inside. I saw it, clear as day. Told her to leave. Said the guy was his now. He put his hands on him. She told him to stop. The statements overlapped, pouring in from witnesses who weren't willing to let silence twist the truth. The restaurant hostess pointed directly at Bastion, her face pale but steady. He groped Daniel. Everyone saw it. One officer scribbled notes so fast his pen nearly broke. The other glanced at me, then at Daniel. His expression shifted, suspicion softening into something else, recognition of injustice. Bastion tried to speak, his words tumbling out slurred, pathetic. "She attacked, unprovoked." But nobody was buying it. Not with a dozen phones capturing his sneer, his threats, his arrogance. Not with half the restaurant as witnesses. Daniel's voice shook as he finally found his words. "He's been tormenting me for months, pushing, pressuring. I didn't think anyone would believe me." His hand trembled in mine, but his eyes locked on the officer's. "You believe me now, don't you?" The officer nodded once, curt. "We'll need statements from both of you. Standard procedure." As they led us to the patrol car, I caught sight of Bastion being lifted to a stretcher. His eyes burned into me with venom, but beneath it was something I hadn't seen before, fear. I held Daniel close, whispering, "He can't hurt you anymore." But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at me. Men like Bastion didn't fade quietly. They regrouped. They retaliated. At the station, Detective Monroe slid a laptop across the table. His expression was unreadable, but when he hit play, the footage spoke louder than any words could. There it was, Bastion's hand sliding down Daniel's side, his sneer, his challenge, my rising fury. The detective paused on Bastion's face mid-taunt. "Leave. He's mine now." He closed the laptop with a snap. "Pretty clear to me," Monroe said. "You protected your partner. We'll file it accordingly. But be prepared. He's powerful, and powerful men push back." Daniel swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. "He already tried to ruin me in the office. What's next?" The detective leaned back, eyes narrowing. "That depends on how many skeletons he's hiding, and from what I hear, it's a graveyard." News spread faster than wildfire. By the time we stepped out of the station, clips of the fight had already gone viral. Hashtags like #AlphaBossDown and #Stand. With Daniel trended across social media. The internet did what the justice system often hesitated to. It magnified truth. Employees from Bastion's company began leaking stories, screenshots, emails. Complaints HR had buried surfaced like corpses in daylight. Women spoke out, their voices flooding comment threads. He cornered me at a party. He threatened my job when I refused him. He told me no one would ever believe me. The whispers of the past had become screams. The company scrambled, releasing a sterile statement. We take these allegations seriously and are launching an internal investigation. But it was too late. The narrative was no longer theirs to control. At home, Daniel sat on the couch, head in his hands. The glow from the television painted his face in cold light as anchors replayed the footage again and again. Each time Bastion's voice snarled, "He's mine now," Daniel flinched. "I should have stopped him sooner," he whispered. "I should have—" I knelt in front of him, gripping his wrists until his hands lowered. "No, don't carry that weight. You froze because you've been surviving under him for too long. That's not weakness, Daniel. That's what happens when someone poisons your sense of self, but it's over now." His eyes lifted to mine, watery, vulnerable. "You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself." I brushed my thumb across his cheek. "Because you're worth fighting for, and don't you ever forget that." His lips trembled into a small, broken smile. For the first time in months, I saw relief flicker across his face, faint but real. But peace didn't come with victory. 2 days later, an envelope slid under our door. No stamp, no address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "This isn't over." I stared at the words, the neat typewritten letters, my hand tightening around the page until it crumpled. When I looked at Daniel, he was already pale, his breath shallow. "Bastion," he whispered. I shook my head slowly, my voice cold, resolute. "Then he's more desperate than I thought, and desperation makes men reckless." A chill settled in my chest as I folded the paper and tucked it away. Bastion's bones might have been broken, but his hunger for control wasn't. The fight on the pavement had been public. The real war was about to begin, and it would not end with bruises. It would end with ruin. The courthouse smelled of old wood polish and nerves. Rows of benches creaked as spectators settled in, their whispers weaving into a tense hum. Daniel and I sat side by side at the plaintiff's table, his hand trembling slightly in mine. When the bailiff called the room to order, I squeezed his palm, steadying us both. Across the aisle, Bastion Drew entered, flanked by his lawyers. 3 of them, dressed in suits that cost more than most people's annual salary. Bastion wore a sling on his arm, a calculated prop to paint himself as the victim. But even that couldn't hide the shadow of rage etched into his face. His lawyers wasted no time. In opening statements, they painted me as violent, unstable, a woman who lost control in public and assaulted a respected executive. Their words dripped with contempt disguised as professionalism. I felt Daniel flinch at every accusation. I held my head high. Then our side began. The prosecutor stood tall, her voice crisp. "This is not a case of an unstable woman lashing out. This is a case of a predator exposed in broad daylight." She gestured to the screen where the first piece of evidence flickered to life, the restaurant surveillance footage. Gasps rippled across the courtroom as Bastion's hand slid down Daniel's side, fingers pressing beneath the fabric of his shirt. His sneer filled the room. "Leave. He's mine now." The judge shifted uncomfortably. A juror's jaw clenched. Bastion's lawyers avoided eye contact with anyone, their carefully woven image unraveling, thread by thread. Witness after witness took the stand. The hostess testified first, her voice trembling but clear. "He touched Daniel. I saw it. She told him to stop. He laughed." A man with glasses stepped up next. "He provoked the fight, said Daniel was his. I've never seen arrogance like it." Each voice was another nail in the coffin. Each testimony stripped away Bastion's carefully polished mask until nothing was left but his true face. Ugly, entitled, predatory. But the real blow came when the prosecutor introduced documents from Bastion's company, buried HR complaints, confidential memos marked resolved informally, accounts from assistants describing groping, cornered meetings, veiled threats. One woman, tears glistening in her eyes, spoke from the witness stand. "I thought no one would believe me, but then I saw the video. I knew I wasn't alone anymore." The jury leaned forward as her voice cracked, the weight of years pressing down on every syllable. Bastion shifted uncomfortably for the first time. His swagger faltered. When it was his turn to testify, he tried to resurrect it. He leaned forward, voice syrupy with false charm. "It was all a misunderstanding, a friendly gesture blown out of proportion. I care deeply about my employees." The prosecutor didn't even flinch. She hit play on a bystander's phone recording. There it was again, his voice, sharp, arrogant, echoing through the speakers. "Leave. He's mine now." The courtroom went still. Whatever confidence he had left evaporated. During recess, Daniel sat hunched beside me, his eyes downcast. "Elena," he whispered, "I should have been stronger. I should have." I turned his face toward me, forcing him to meet my gaze. "You survived him, Daniel. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you brave. Don't let his poison rewrite your worth." His lips trembled. Then he nodded, eyes glassy with unspoken gratitude. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours. When they filed back in, the verdict was clear even before the foreman spoke. Guilty of sexual harassment, guilty of assault. The judge's voice cut like a blade. "Mr. Drew, the law is not your shield for predation. Actions have consequences. Today, you face yours." Across the aisle, Bastion sagged. His lawyers looked like men watching their empire collapse stone by stone. Daniel wept quietly into my shoulder, his body shaking with relief. I wrapped my arm around him, holding him as though I could shield him from every shadow. I hadn't just defended him that day on the street. I had defended his dignity, his worth, his voice. And for the first time, Bastion Drew wasn't feared. He was exposed. When we walked out of the courthouse, the sky was heavy with clouds, but I felt lighter than I had in months. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, but I barely heard their questions. Daniel's hand in mine was all that mattered. I whispered to him as we pushed through the noise, "It's over." But even as I said it, I knew deep down this was only the beginning of his ruin. Bastion Drew's fall wasn't a crash. It was a free fall with no bottom in sight. The day after the verdict, his company issued a statement. "Effective immediately, Mr. Drew has been terminated. We do not tolerate misconduct." Everyone knew it was a lie. They had tolerated him for years, burying complaints under polished reports and settlements. But now he wasn't an asset. He was a liability they couldn't afford to shield. First went his job, then his reputation. Sponsors yanked contracts. Conferences erased his name from their speaker lists. Magazines that once plastered his grin across glossy covers now ran exposés with headlines like, "From Alpha to Outcast." Investors abandoned him. Colleagues who once praised him in public now pretended they'd never known him. And the lawsuits rolled in. One by one, women came forward. Former assistants, junior staff, women he had cornered at parties. Their voices carried a weight I could feel in my bones. "I was afraid to speak," one woman said on a morning news segment. But when I saw Elena stand up to him, I knew it was time. Our case had cracked the dam. The flood followed. The courtroom ordered him to pay damages to Daniel. It wasn't just money, it was recognition. A formal stamp declaring that what happened was real, that it was wrong. But beyond that, the civil suits piled higher, draining his fortune. Offshore accounts were frozen. Assets he thought were untouchable suddenly weren't. The man who once boasted of penthouses and imported cars was forced to sell everything to cover mounting fees. By year's end, Bastion Drew wasn't living in luxury. He was hiding in a dingy apartment, sunglasses pulled low to shield himself from the cameras waiting outside. But money wasn't the wound that cut deepest. It was the silence. The same men who once called him Alpha now mocked him behind his back. The women he preyed on walked tall while he shrank into shadows. His name had become poison, whispered with derision, never respect. The empire he built on fear was gone. For Daniel and me, life didn't return to normal. It built something new. The nightmares faded slowly, like ink dissolving in water. The tremor in Daniel's hands eased. He began smiling again, real smiles, the kind that reached his eyes. He transferred to another department under a manager who valued his talent rather than exploiting his vulnerability. One evening, we sat on the balcony as the city lights flickered below us. Daniel's voice was soft, hesitant. "You didn't just protect me, Elena, you gave me my voice back." I turned to him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. No one should have to fight alone. He kissed my hand then, a quiet vow. In his eyes I saw not the man Bastion tried to break, but the man who had survived and reclaimed himself. Months passed. Headlines shifted to new scandals. Bastion Drew's name became little more than a cautionary tale in business circles. "Don't end up like him," people whispered. Sometimes, when I caught pieces of gossip about his lawsuits dragging on, I felt nothing. Not triumph, not pity, just clarity. His ruin wasn't mine to carry. It belonged to him alone. One night, Daniel and I sat by the fire. He stared at the flames for a long while before asking, "Do you regret it? Breaking him that way?" I thought about it. The fight, the trial, the long shadows of those months. Then I shook my head. No, I don't regret protecting you. And I don't regret ending his illusion that he could take whatever he wanted. Sometimes men like him only understand one thing, what it feels like to lose power. Daniel leaned his head on my shoulder. His voice was a whisper. Then you taught him. I smiled faintly, holding him close. No, we taught him. The true victory wasn't in his broken bones or drained accounts. It was in the broken cycle. Bastion Drew would never smirk his way out of accountability again. He would never touch another person in the shadows of entitlement. For us, the victory was quieter. Daniel walking into work with confidence instead of dread. His laughter filling the apartment again. The way he no longer lowered his voice in meetings. The way he looked people in the eye without flinching. Love, I realized, isn't just about tenderness or promises. It's about defense. About standing in the breach when someone tries to strip away the dignity of the person you love. And sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or verdicts. Sometimes it begins the moment you decide enough is enough. Bastion once told me, he's mine now. But he was wrong. Daniel was never his to claim. The only thing Bastion Drew truly owned in the end was ruin. They say revenge is hollow, that breaking someone leaves you empty in the end. But no one talks about the kind of revenge that isn't born from rage. It's born from love, from survival, from dignity. Bastion. Drew thought he was untouchable. He thought his title, his wealth, and his arrogance made him untouchable. He thought Daniel was just another possession he could claim, and that I was just another obstacle too weak to matter. But in 10 minutes, he learned the truth. Power without respect is fragile. Arrogance without accountability is paper thin. One fracture, and it crumbles. He lost everything. His career, his fortune, his reputation. His name, once a weapon of intimidation, became a warning. Boardrooms whispered about him not as an example to follow, but as a cautionary tale. Don't end up like him. And we gained more than peace. Daniel no longer walked with his shoulders hunched, no longer flinched when his phone buzzed with late-night messages, no longer carried the invisible weight of Bastion's shadow. He laughed again. He dreamed again. He was free. And me? I carried the memory of that day like a scar, but not one I regretted. It reminded me that love isn't just about flowers and soft promises. It's about standing up when someone tries to tear away your dignity, your family, your very humanity. Revenge isn't always about violence. Sometimes it's about taking the one thing your enemy values most and showing them they never deserved it. For Bastion, that was power. For us, it was freedom. And while his bones healed, his reputation never did. In the end, I didn't just break a man. I broke the illusion that he could own us. And that is a victory no one can ever take away. Was this justice? Or should the storm have burned hotter? Drop your verdict below. I read every word. Hit like if you crave justice. Share this story with someone who needs its fire. Subscribe to Elena's story, because here, betrayals don't sleep. They haunt their owners. Every shadow hides a reckoning. Every mask breaks. And every betrayal is answered. Stay sharp, stay unbroken, stay tuned.